What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over several tips to hopefully help you play better with crash pads in Fortnite Chapter 7, because this is the main fighting mobility item we currently have in the loot pool. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and comment down below what you think of crash pads being in the loot pool now. And if you guys would like to use my code in the shop when getting anything, it is EvolveJake, just like my channel name is, and it is underneath the webcam at all times. So my opinion on crash pads is that I think they are a less effective mobility item than shockwaves, but I am fine with this being the case. Like, I'd prefer to have shockwaves, I'd prefer to have the Forsaken Blade, but I'm also open to this being the mobility item in the loot pool. I think it's fine to play around. Using them is actually much easier than shockwaves are, especially if you're like a newer player who never got used to shockwaves. I feel like it's much easier to just pick up and play with the crash pads. There's two main ways you can do it. You can either throw it down and then run into it, or you can just hit your jump button while in air. And since you can activate it by essentially just double jumping, a lot of players think that's just like the best thing to do and how you should always do it. But from my experience playing, I feel like I go further and I have like more control over exactly where I'm going if I sprint and like slide into it rather than just doing the double jump. The double jump activation can also be a bit buggy at times and not really go off, but it is nice to have in a pinch that you can activate it by double jumping. There are just times where throwing it and sliding it may feel a bit better or feel a little bit more fluid. So if you've only done the double jump, you might want to try throwing it out and sliding in some situations, because to me, it feels like I go much further that way. Either way, I don't think it's as simple as you should just do one or the other. You kind of want to do what the situation you're in the scenario you're in kind of calls for. If it's a very chaotic moment, just being able to hit the jump button twice and potentially reposition is really nice. But if you have a little bit more time to set up, or you're trying to go to a very specific spot, throwing it down and then running into it or sliding into it might be the best thing to do. You can also use this to avoid fall damage, since if you hit the jump button while falling, your character will throw one and you'll land on it. So you should be immune to fall damage if you have this in your inventory. Fortnite is Fortnite, and maybe sometimes it's buggy. There are numerous bugs that have existed in game where you get fall damage after crash padding, but it's not supposed to actually happen. And you can actually chain them several in a row by just hitting the jump button while you're traveling in air after using one. So I think it's easier to use. There's some versatility and maybe decisions you have to make about how you're going to use it in a certain situation. But the fact that you could just hit the jump button twice and use this item makes it a lot easier to use. One thing that's kind of a downside of this item in some people's minds is that since it remains on the ground for a while, other people can use it to follow you. And this is nice in team game modes, because you can throw one down and then your entire squad could use it if y'all were all grouped up. But you also need to worry about enemies potentially doing this. And what a lot of players like to do is after they crash pad and while they're traveling in the air, they'll turn and shoot the crash pad out behind them. That way the enemy can't use it to follow you, because once the pad gets damaged, it deflates and is no longer usable. So you can crash pad and then turn and shoot it to prevent enemies from following you. And this can also be nice for splitting up teams that try to use it if you break it before they all go. Especially if you're in like a close range fight and someone uses it and then they all try to follow him. If you break that crash pad, that team is potentially split up, and that's going to make it much easier for you to play the fight out. So that might be something you want to keep in mind as well. I feel like also there's times where I like leaving it for enemies to follow me. That way I can like beam them in the air or shoot it just before they use it, and kind of leave them stranded in no man's land. I talked about this in the video I made about like resetting fights, how people who are chasing you are often very vulnerable, and so you can kind of use the fact that they can easily follow you with a crash pad to your advantage if you get to cover first, and then, you know, look back and beam them as they're on their way to you. And just in general, I feel like the player traveling in the air after using the crash pad is a bit slower than with shocks, and this leaves you yourself pretty vulnerable to getting fried out of the air when using them or on enemies. I think the new aim down sight feature while in air, they added this in Chapter 7 to where you can aim in with your weapons while in air. I feel like this pairs very well with the crash pads. If I'm pushing somebody that's head on and potentially looking at me, I definitely want to try to ADS and hit some shots on them as I'm on my way to them with my Deadeye AR. And the fact that Chapter 7 allows this to happen is something that I think you definitely want to get in the habit of. This was already good with shockwaves, but how fast you went with shockwaves made it not as feasible in certain situations, or not as necessary. But since you're traveling a bit slower using this, I think you definitely want to get in the habit of doing that if you're pushing somebody head on, because the angles you get while in the air is very favorable and typically very easy to hit the enemies with. As I said early on in the video, overall I think crash pads are a bit less effective than shockwaves, but they're also a bit easier to use. One thing that is really unfortunate with the South Park update, or just the current version of the game, is that the spawn rate for these crash pads feels terribly low. And I would be very accepting of this being the item if the spawn rate was good. These drops in stacks of 2, and you can carry up to 6 in a single inventory slot, so you need to find 3 spawns to have a full stack. And how easy it is to use means that a lot of enemies will probably get them off if they have it in their inventory as you eliminate them, or, you know, right before you eliminate them, because all they have to do is hit the jump button twice. You know, like, it being easy to use is nice for you, but it also means enemies are going to get it off easier. And so I find that I get less back from enemies I eliminate typically. In the past, they dropped in stacks of 3, so you only needed to find 2 spawns to get it, to have a full stack. And that's one thing that I feel like they could change, even if they didn't want to bump up the spawn rate. Making it to where they dropped in stacks of 3 again would be much more forgiving, or at least make that like low spawn rate a lot less of a problem. Because I've had many games this season, and I'm sure many of you have as well, where you loot basically an entire POI and you come away with 0 crash pads, or like maybe just 2. They also aren't currently in vending machines, but I think that could be another solution. The little pockets that are on the balloons that travel around the map do have a good chance to actually give you crash pads in the same way that they did with shockwaves. And the human bill boss will actually drop them. I actually got them from the human bill today. I don't know if it's guaranteed or just a spawn chance, or a chance to happen. I think I had been told that it didn't drop from it, or maybe I eliminated the boss shortly after the update and I didn't get any crash pads. But like I said, playing today, I was able to get crash pads by eliminating the human bill boss. So that is something that at least is a solution there, but it's not like this is something that you're going to be able to take advantage of consistently in like every single match. You know, if the boss happens to be where you are, maybe you want to kill him and try to get it, but other than that, it's not like something you can consistently rely on. And the same thing is true with the balloons. If you don't land on them, a lot of times those pockets could be opened by the time you get to it, but I still think it is worth checking out. If you are going through any sort of area that has the balloons, I think it's worth checking out and finding out if the balloon pockets are spawning crash pads that game, or if they haven't been looted, I mean, sorry. But that is basically going to be it for this video. Oh, also one thing that this is important. A lot of people run into this problem where, so the fact that you double jump to throw it, basically, or hit your jump button while in air, makes a lot of people accidentally waste them when they go to mantle something. Because typically when you go to mantle something, you jump and then you hit your jump button again to grab the mantle and pull yourself up. In situations where you have the crash pads in your inventory, you want to jump and hold the jump button just that one time to mantle. The same thing was true when we had dashes, whether it was from the Grim Water in Chapter 5 or the dash sprites in Chapter 6. If you had dashes, you had to be careful about mantling, because dashes also activated by hitting your jump button while in air. So try to be a bit more intentional with your mantles. There is a mantle setting to where you can make it to where just holding forward makes your character mantle. But I personally don't change that just to get around this one bug. I feel like you need to just be a little bit more intentional with your mantling. Like I said, hit the button once and hold it that once as you're approaching the thing you want to mantle, and you should be able to grab it and mantle without actually wasting your crash pads, since you didn't hit the jump button while in air, you just hit it once and held it. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.